Marcus stood in the hospital billing office, staring at a stack of invoices marked paid in full. $2 million, 23 months. Every single one came from an account his wife didn't know existed. The administrator's voice felt distant. "Mr. Thompson, these records are confidential. Does your wife know?" Before we get into this story, if you appreciate real stories about sacrifice, betrayal, and truth, stories that make you think, hit that subscribe button. You're in the right place. Let's get into it. Marcus Thompson was 42 years old when he made a decision that would define him in ways he never imagined. He was a senior financial analyst at a mid-sized consulting firm in Atlanta, the kind of man who showed up early and left late, who double-checked numbers because he understood that precision mattered. He'd been married to Vanessa for 15 years, and in that time, he'd learned that love wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was quiet. Sometimes it was showing up. Sometimes it was carrying weight without asking for recognition. Vanessa's father, Robert Hayes, was 68 when the diagnosis came. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, the kind of news that doesn't leave room for hope, only time. Robert had been a postal worker for 37 years, the kind of man who knew everyone on his route by name, who remembered birthdays and asked about grandkids. He'd treated Marcus like the son he never had from the day Vanessa brought him home. There was respect there, the kind that didn't need words. When Robert got sick, the family did what families do. They rallied. Vanessa took leave from her job as a school administrator to help her mother, Dorothy, manage the care, doctor appointments, medication schedules, the endless paperwork that comes with terminal illness. But underneath all of that was something nobody wanted to talk about directly: the money. Insurance covered about 40% of the treatment costs. The rest fell on the family like stones into deep water. Marcus watched Vanessa carry the weight of watching her father die. He saw how she'd come home and sit in the dark before turning on lights, how she'd stopped sleeping more than 4 hours a night, how her hands shook when she opened bills. He couldn't take away the cancer, he couldn't stop time, but he could do something about the money, so he opened a separate account. Didn't tell Vanessa, didn't tell anyone. He took on weekend consulting work, the kind of projects that paid well but demanded hours he didn't have. He sold his 1967 Chevrolet Impala, the car he'd restored over 5 years in his garage, the car Vanessa always called his weekend therapy. He cashed out stock options he'd been holding for retirement, and every month when the hospital bills came, Marcus paid them. $87,000 a month on average, sometimes more. The bills came to a P.O. box he'd opened. Marcus would pick them up during his lunch break, review them in his car, then submit payment through the separate account. He'd set up automatic alerts so he'd know the moment a charge posted. 23 months. Not once did a bill go unpaid. Not once did Robert's treatment pause because of money. Vanessa noticed Marcus was tired. She'd ask him if work was okay, if he needed to talk. He'd smile, tell her he was fine, just some demanding projects. She believed him because there was no reason not to. Their marriage had always been built on trust. Marcus made sure their household bills were paid on time. Their savings account stayed stable. From Vanessa's perspective, nothing had changed. But Marcus was working 80-hour weeks. He'd be at his regular job from 7 in the morning until 6 at night. Then he'd come home, eat dinner with Vanessa, and at 9 o'clock he'd go into his home office and work on consulting projects until 2 or 3 in the morning. Weekends were the same. He took calls in the car. He worked during lunch breaks. Every dollar went toward one thing: keeping Robert alive as long as medicine would allow. Robert's condition stabilized briefly in the spring. There was a moment, maybe 6 weeks, where it seemed like maybe the treatment was working better than expected. Vanessa laughed more during that time. Dorothy started talking about taking a trip once Robert was stronger. Marcus just kept paying the bills and watching a man he respected fight with everything he had. Then the decline came, rapid and ruthless. By July, Robert was on hospice care at home. The family took shifts. Vanessa barely left her parents' house. Marcus would come by after work, sit with Robert when everyone else was asleep, talk to him about sports and weather and nothing important. Robert couldn't respond much by then, but his eyes would focus on Marcus with something that looked like gratitude. Robert passed away on a Thursday evening in August. Peacefully, the hospice nurse said. Vanessa was holding his hand. Dorothy was beside her. Marcus was in the hallway giving them space for goodbye. When the nurse came out and nodded, Marcus felt something crack in his chest. Not because he'd failed, he'd done everything possible, but because he'd known this moment was coming for 2 years, and it still felt like surprise. The funeral was packed. Over 200 people came to pay respects to a man who delivered their mail and remembered their lives. The service was beautiful in the way sad things sometimes are. Vanessa spoke about her father with a steady voice that broke only once. Dorothy held herself together with the kind of strength that comes from having no other choice. Marcus sat in the front row, hands folded, present but quiet. The reception was at the Hayes family home afterward. The house was full of people, the kind of gathering where everyone speaks in low voices and casseroles cover every surface. Marcus moved through the crowd, accepting condolences, making sure Vanessa had what she needed. He'd just handed her a glass of water when Vanessa's cousin Monica said something that changed everything. Monica was talking to a small group near the kitchen. She wasn't trying to cause trouble, just making conversation the way people do at funerals, searching for something to say that feels meaningful. "It's such a shame the treatment stopped early," Monica said, her voice carrying more than she probably intended. If only there'd been more money for those experimental options. Marcus felt the room temperature shift before he understood why. Vanessa had been mid-conversation with someone else, but her head turned toward Monica's voice. Her face changed. The grief that had been there a moment before was replaced by something sharper. Dorothy, Vanessa's mother, was standing near the dining table. She'd overheard Monica, too. "The doctors said Robert could have had another 6 months with the experimental treatment," Dorothy added, her voice tight with emotion. "But insurance wouldn't cover it. We just couldn't afford it." Marcus opened his mouth to speak, to redirect the conversation somewhere else, anywhere else. But Vanessa was already moving toward him. There were 40 people in that house. The conversations hadn't stopped yet, but they would in about 3 seconds. Vanessa's hand came across Marcus's face, hard enough that the sound echoed. The room went silent. Marcus's cheek burned. He stood there, didn't raise his hand to touch it, didn't step back, just looked at his wife and saw something in her eyes he'd never seen before. Rage and grief mixed into something that couldn't tell them apart. "You're the reason he's gone!" Vanessa's voice wasn't a scream, but it was close. Everyone in the house could hear her. "You promised you'd help. You said money wouldn't be an issue." Marcus could feel every eye in the room on them. His face was hot where she'd hit him, but that wasn't what hurt. He kept his voice low. "Vanessa, this isn't the place. You sat there while my father died because you were too cheap to dig deeper." Vanessa's hands were shaking. Tears were running down her face, but her voice was steady enough to cut. "You made me believe we were doing everything possible, and you just let him die." Marcus didn't defend himself, didn't explain. 40 people were watching them, including Dorothy, including Vanessa's brother Jerome, including people from Robert's postal route who barely knew Marcus. This wasn't the moment to speak. Some truths are too big for crowds. "Get out," Vanessa said. Her voice had dropped to something quieter, somehow worse than shouting. "Get out of my parents' house." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once and walked through the crowd toward the door. Nobody stopped him. Nobody said anything. He heard someone whisper something behind him but couldn't make out the words. He got in his car, pulled out of the driveway, and drove. He didn't go home. Home was their house, and right now, that felt impossible. He found a Hampton Inn off Highway 85 and checked in with a credit card and a small overnight bag he kept in his trunk for work trips. The room was generic in the way hotel rooms are. Beige walls, landscape painting that could have been anywhere. Marcus sat on the edge of the bed and stared at nothing. 3 days passed. Marcus went to work because not working felt worse than working. He answered emails. He attended meetings. People probably asked him how he was doing, and he probably answered fine. At night, he returned to the hotel room and sat in the silence. Vanessa didn't call, didn't text. On the 3rd day, a message came through. "I need space, don't contact me." Marcus read it 5 times. Then he set the phone down and stared at the ceiling. He wasn't angry. Anger would have been easier. He was just sad. Sad that Robert was gone. Sad that Vanessa believed he'd let her father die over money. Sad that he'd carried this secret for 2 years, and now the secret was crushing them both in different ways. On the 4th day, Marcus called the hospital, specifically the billing department at Emory University Hospital, where Robert had received most of his treatment. He asked to speak with someone about payment records. The receptionist transferred him twice before he reached Mrs. Chen, a woman who'd been working in medical billing for 30 years and had a voice that suggested she'd seen everything twice. "I need to request a complete payment history for Robert Hayes," Marcus said. "I'm family. I've been managing the account." There was typing on the other end, then silence, then more typing. Mrs. Chen's voice, when it came back, was careful. "Mr. Thompson, these records are confidential patient information. Before I can release anything, I need to verify your authorization. Does your wife know about this account?" "No," Marcus said. Another pause, longer this time. "Mr. Thompson, I'm looking at 23 months of payments here, all from a business account registered to you. The total is $2,014,750.82. Marcus closed his eyes. Hearing the number out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "I need printed documentation, everything. Invoices, receipts, payment confirmations." Mrs. Chen was quiet for a moment. Then, "I can have that ready for you tomorrow. But Mr. Thompson, I have to ask, if your wife doesn't know about this, why are you requesting the records now?" "Because," Marcus said slowly, "she thinks I'm the reason her father died." The silence on the other end of the line said more than words could. Mrs. Chen scheduled him for an appointment the next morning. Marcus showed up at the hospital at 9 o'clock. Mrs. Chen met him in a small office that smelled like coffee and copy paper. She had a box waiting. Not a folder, a box. 23 months of documentation. Every invoice, every payment receipt, every insurance denial, and every appeal Marcus had filed. She'd also printed something he hadn't requested, the experimental treatment authorization requests he'd submitted, and the responses from 3 different oncologists. Marcus looked at the papers and something clicked in his mind that hadn't been clear before. He sat down and started reading. The experimental treatment that Monica had mentioned, the one Dorothy said could have given Robert 6 more months. It wasn't even approved by the FDA for pancreatic cancer. It was designed for a different type of cancer entirely. Marcus remembered this now. He'd researched it himself, spent hours reading medical journals he barely understood. He'd contacted 3 oncologists independently of Robert's primary care team, asked each of them the same question. Would this treatment work for Robert's specific case? All 3 had said no. Not maybe, not possibly. No, the treatment wouldn't have extended Robert's life. It would have made his final months more painful with side effects and no benefit. Robert's primary doctor, Dr. Williams, had agreed with the assessment. Marcus found the email chain in the documentation. There, in careful medical language, was the truth. The decision not to pursue that experimental treatment wasn't financial. It was medical. It was mercy. But Vanessa had never known Marcus was the one paying for everything else. So when her mother said they couldn't afford the experimental treatment, Vanessa filled in the gap with the only explanation that made sense to her. Marcus hadn't paid for it. Marcus sat in that small office reading documentation that rewrote the last 2 years of his life. Mrs. Chen had left him alone, maybe sensing he needed space. When he finally looked up, an hour had passed. There was something else in the box. Marcus found it near the bottom. A letter from the life insurance company addressed to Dorothy Hayes, dated a week after Robert's funeral. It was a payment confirmation for a $150,000 policy, Robert's life insurance. Marcus stared at that letter for a long time. Dorothy had told Vanessa that the medical bills had bankrupted them, but the medical bills were already paid by Marcus, which meant that $150,000 in life insurance money had gone. Where? Marcus put all the documentation back in the box carefully, like it was evidence, because it was. He thanked Mrs. Chen. She looked at him with something that might have been sympathy or respect, or both. "I've worked here 30 years, she said quietly. "I've never seen a family member do this alone. Most people would have told someone. I didn't want her to feel like she owed me anything," Marcus said. Mrs. Chen nodded like she understood, even though Marcus wasn't sure he understood it himself anymore. Marcus took the box back to the hotel. He spent the rest of the day going through every document, organizing them chronologically, highlighting the key details, the payment receipts, the medical opinions about the experimental treatment, the insurance payout letter. By the time he finished, it was dark outside, and he'd been sitting in the same position for so long his back hurt. He received a text from Vanessa's brother, Jerome. "Mom's calling a family meeting next week. She says it's about Dad's estate. She wants you there. Bring any financial records you have." Marcus read the message twice. Then he looked at the box of documents sitting on the hotel desk. Some moments arrive like destiny. This was one of them. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday at the Hayes family home. Marcus arrived at exactly 2 o'clock, carrying a manila folder. Not the whole box, just the essentials, the papers that mattered. He walked into a house he'd been thrown out of 8 days earlier and found 5 people waiting in the living room. Vanessa, Dorothy, Monica, Jerome, and a man Marcus didn't recognize but who introduced himself as Mr. Patterson, the family attorney. The room was arranged like a business meeting. Dorothy sat in Robert's chair. The attorney was at the dining table with papers spread out. Everyone else found seats on the couch and chairs. Marcus remained standing near the door, folder in his hand. Dorothy began speaking. Her voice was formal, the way people sound when they've rehearsed something. "We've asked everyone here today to discuss Robert's debts. The medical bills have destroyed us financially. Mr. Patterson is going to review the estate, but we need to be realistic about what's owed." Mr. Patterson opened a leather portfolio and pulled out several documents. He was an older black man with gray in his beard and reading glasses that sat low on his nose. He had the air of someone who'd been doing this work long enough to have seen every family dynamic play out. "Mrs. Hayes," he said carefully, "I've reviewed the estate as requested. I've also pulled records from the hospital and insurance companies. There are no outstanding medical bills. Everything shows paid in full." Dorothy's face went blank. "That's impossible. Insurance only covered 40%. We've been drowning in bills for 2 years." Mr. Patterson looked uncomfortable. the way attorneys do when they have to deliver news that's going to detonate in a room. He glanced at Marcus, then back at Dorothy. Mrs. Hayes, the bills were paid, all of them, but not by insurance, and not by you. Vanessa had been sitting silently on the couch, hands folded in her lap, her head turned toward Marcus. Everyone in the room followed her gaze. Marcus walked forward and placed the manila folder on the table in front of Mr. Patterson. He didn't say anything, just slid it across and stepped back. The attorney opened the folder. He went very still as he read the first page, then the second. His expression shifted from professional neutrality to something else, surprise maybe, or disbelief. He looked up at Marcus, then at Dorothy, then back at the papers. "Mrs. Hayes," Mr. Patterson said slowly, "these bills were paid by Marcus, all of them, $2,014,750.82, over 23 months. The silence in the room was total. It wasn't the kind of quiet that waits to be filled. It was the kind that crushes sound. Vanessa reached for the folder. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely open it. She pulled out the first document, an invoice from Emory Hospital for $82,000, dated March of the previous year, stamped across it in red ink, paid in full. Payment source, M. Thompson business account. She flipped to the next page. Another invoice, $91,000, paid in full. Same source. She kept flipping, page after page after page. 23 months of bills. Every single one paid. Dorothy stood up. "That can't be right. We never saw any of these payments. We never knew." Mr. Patterson held up a hand gently. "Mrs. Hayes, according to these records, Marcus set up a separate payment arrangement with the hospital. All bills went to him directly. You wouldn't have seen them because they never came to your address." He kept reading, his finger tracing down the pages. Then he stopped on one document in particular. "There's also documentation here about an experimental treatment. Looks like Marcus consulted 3 oncologists independently. All 3 advised against it. The treatment wasn't FDA approved for pancreatic cancer. It was for a different cancer type entirely." He looked up at Dorothy. "The decision not to pursue that treatment wasn't financial. It was medical. These doctors all say the same thing. It would have caused harm without benefit." Vanessa's face had gone pale. She was staring at the papers, but Marcus didn't think she was seeing them anymore. Her voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me?" Marcus had stayed near the door this whole time. He hadn't sat down, hadn't moved closer. Now he spoke, and his voice was calm the way deep water is calm. Because it wasn't about credit. It was about your father getting care. $2 million. Vanessa's voice cracked on the number. "You paid $2 million and never said a word?" "I sold my car," Marcus said simply. "Took weekend consulting work, cashed out stocks. It's just money, Vanessa. Your father needed time. I couldn't buy him more time, but I could make sure money wasn't the reason he lost any." Jerome, who'd been sitting silently through all of this, put his head in his hands. Monica looked like she wanted to disappear into the couch. Dorothy had sat back down and was staring at nothing. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat. He'd found another document in the folder. Marcus hadn't meant to include it. It must have been stuck to another page. The attorney held it up. "Mrs. Hayes, there's also documentation here regarding a life insurance payout. $150,000. Paid to you 2 weeks ago." Dorothy's expression changed. Something defensive crossed her face. "That's for funeral costs, for the debt." "Ma'am," Mr. Patterson said carefully, "there is no debt. The funeral costs were $7,000. And as we've established, all medical bills were already paid. Can you account for this money?" The room waited. Dorothy looked at Vanessa, then at Jerome, then at the floor. "I didn't know Marcus had paid everything. I thought we were drowning. I just wanted security. I was going to use it for a condo in Florida. I've been looking at properties." Vanessa stood up so fast her chair nearly tipped over. "You let me blame him." Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like winter wind. "You stood there at Dad's funeral. You heard me scream at him. You watched me hit him in front of everyone, and you said nothing." Dorothy started crying. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know he'd paid." "You knew I believed we were out of money." Vanessa's voice rose. "You knew I thought Marcus had let my father die. You could have said something, anything, but you let me humiliate him. You let me throw him out of this house." Dorothy had no defense. What defense was there? She'd stood silent while her daughter destroyed her marriage over a lie. Whether she'd known the full truth or not didn't matter. She'd known enough. Jerome spoke for the first time. His voice was rough. "Man," he said, looking at Marcus, "I don't even know what to say. What you did, that's love. Real love." Marcus didn't respond to that. He looked at Vanessa instead. She was still standing, staring at her mother with an expression that held too many emotions to separate. Grief, betrayal, shame, something breaking. The attorney opened the folder. He went very still as he read the first page, then the second. His expression shifted from professional neutrality to something else. Surprise, maybe, or disbelief. He looked up at Marcus, then at Dorothy, then back at the papers. "Mrs. Hayes," Mr. Patterson said slowly, "these bills were paid by Marcus, all of them, $2,014,750.82, over 23 months. The silence in the room was total. It wasn't the kind of quiet that waits to be filled. It was the kind that crushes sound. Vanessa reached for the folder. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely open it. She pulled out the first document, an invoice from Emory Hospital for $82,000, dated March of the previous year, stamped across it in red ink, paid in full. Payment source, M. Thompson business account. She flipped to the next page. Another invoice, $91,000, paid in full. Same source. She kept flipping, page after page after page. 23 months of bills. Every single one paid. Dorothy stood up. "That can't be right. We never saw any of these payments. We never knew." Mr. Patterson held up a hand gently. "Mrs. Hayes, according to these records, Marcus set up a separate payment arrangement with the hospital. All bills went to him directly. You wouldn't have seen them because they never came to your address." He kept reading, his finger tracing down the pages. Then he stopped on one document in particular. "There's also documentation here about an experimental treatment. Looks like Marcus consulted 3 oncologists independently. All 3 advised against it. The treatment wasn't FDA approved for pancreatic cancer. It was for a different cancer type entirely." He looked up at Dorothy. The decision not to pursue that treatment wasn't financial. It was medical. These doctors all say the same thing. It would have caused harm without benefit. Vanessa's face had gone pale. She was staring at the papers, but Marcus didn't think she was seeing them anymore. Her voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me?" Marcus had stayed near the door this whole time. He hadn't sat down, hadn't moved closer. Now he spoke, and his voice was calm the way deep water is calm. Because it wasn't about credit. It was about your father getting care. $2 million. Vanessa's voice cracked on the number. "You paid $2 million and never said a word?" "I sold my car," Marcus said simply. "Took weekend consulting work, cashed out stocks. It's just money, Vanessa. Your father needed time. I couldn't buy him more time, but I could make sure money wasn't the reason he lost any." Jerome, who'd been sitting silently through all of this, put his head in his hands. Monica looked like she wanted to disappear into the couch. Dorothy had sat back down and was staring at nothing. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat. He'd found another document in the folder. Marcus hadn't meant to include it. It must have been stuck to another page. The attorney held it up. Mrs. Hayes, there's also documentation here regarding a life insurance payout. $150,000. Paid to you 2 weeks ago. Dorothy's expression changed. Something defensive crossed her face. That's for funeral costs, for the debt. Ma'am, Mr. Patterson said carefully, there is no debt. The funeral costs were $7,000. And as we've established, all medical bills were already paid. Can you account for this money? The room waited. Dorothy looked at Vanessa, then at Jerome, then at the floor. I didn't know Marcus had paid everything. I thought we were drowning. I just wanted security. I was going to use it for a condo in Florida. I've been looking at properties. Vanessa stood up so fast her chair nearly tipped over. You let me blame him. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like winter wind. You stood there at Dad's funeral. You heard me scream at him. You watched me hit him in front of everyone, and you said nothing. Dorothy started crying. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know he'd paid. You knew I believed we were out of money. Vanessa's voice rose. You knew I thought Marcus had let my father die. You could have said something, anything, but you let me humiliate him. You let me throw him out of this house. Dorothy had no defense. What defense was there? She'd stood silent while her daughter destroyed her marriage over a lie. Whether she'd known the full truth or not didn't matter. She'd known enough. Jerome spoke for the first time. His voice was rough. Man, he said, looking at Marcus, I don't even know what to say. What you did, that's love. Real love. Marcus didn't respond to that. He looked at Vanessa instead. She was still standing, staring at her mother with an expression that held too many emotions to separate. Grief, betrayal, shame, something breaking. I need to leave, Vanessa said. She wasn't talking to anyone specific. Maybe she was talking to herself. She picked up her purse and walked out of the house. A moment later, they heard her car start. Then she was gone. The meeting ended without resolution. Mr. Patterson gathered his papers, told Dorothy they'd need to have a longer conversation about the estate and the insurance money, and left. Monica made an excuse and disappeared. Jerome stayed for a moment, clasped Marcus's shoulder without saying anything. Then he left too. Marcus was alone in the house with Dorothy. She was still crying, but quietly now. Marcus picked up his folder, put the papers back inside carefully. Dorothy watched him from Robert's chair. I'm sorry, she said. Marcus looked at her. He wasn't angry. Anger would have required energy he didn't have. You should tell her that, not me. Then he left. He drove back to the hotel, packed his few belongings, and checked out. The woman at the front desk asked if everything had been satisfactory. Marcus said yes. He found a small apartment in Brookhaven, a one-bedroom place with hardwood floors and windows that faced east. The lease was month to month. He moved in with a suitcase, his laptop, and the box of medical records. It was enough. Days passed into weeks. Vanessa filed for legal separation, not divorce, separation. The papers came through an attorney Marcus didn't know. There was no request for alimony, no splitting of assets, just space, legal, formal space. Marcus signed the papers without contest. Jerome called once. She can't face you, he said. She wants to, but she can't. She says she doesn't know how to live with what she did. Marcus told Jerome that he understood. He did. Shame is harder to carry than grief sometimes. 3 months went by. Marcus rebuilt his finances slowly. The consulting work continued. His regular job remained stable. He'd need years to recover what he'd spent, but he'd known that going in. Money was just numbers until you needed it for something that mattered. He'd needed it for Robert. Now Robert was gone, and the money was gone, and Marcus was here. That was how it went. On a Saturday in November, Marcus received something unexpected. Not a text or a call, but a letter, handwritten. His name and address in Vanessa's careful script. He held it for a long time before opening it. The letter was 2 pages, front and back. Her handwriting was steady, but there were places where the ink had smudged slightly, like tears had fallen while she wrote. "Marcus," it began, "I don't know if sorry is enough. I don't know if anything is. You gave my father 2 more years of life. You worked yourself to exhaustion. You sold things you loved. You spent money you'd saved for our future. And I took the one thing you deserved: respect. I hit you. I screamed at you in front of everyone. I threw you out of my father's house at his funeral. I believed you let him die over money when the truth was you'd bankrupted yourself to keep him alive. I need time to understand who I became that day. I need time to live with the person I was. But I need you to know, even if you never forgive me, even if we never speak again, you are the best man I've ever known. You loved my father like he was your own. And I'm ashamed that I couldn't see that. I'm ashamed that when you needed me to trust you, I trusted everyone else instead. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if there's a way forward from this. But you deserve to know the truth about yourself, even if I had to be the one to tell you. You are good, Marcus. That's what I should have said at the funeral. That's what I should have said every day for 23 months. You are good. Vanessa. Marcus read the letter 3 times. Then he folded it carefully and put it in the drawer of his nightstand. He didn't respond immediately, didn't pick up the phone or write back. Instead, he did something he hadn't done since the funeral. He drove to the cemetery. Robert's grave was in a quiet section under oak trees. The headstone was simple. Robert Hayes, beloved father, husband, friend. Marcus stood there for a while, hands in his pockets, watching leaves fall. I kept my word to you, Marcus said quietly to the stone. I made sure she never had to choose between you and Bill's. Made sure she could just be your daughter while you were here. I'd do it again. Every dollar, every hour, I'd do it again. The wind moved through the trees. Marcus stayed until the sun started setting. Then he walked back to his car. That night, at his apartment, Marcus worked late on a consulting project. It was after midnight when his phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa. Just 6 words. Can we talk? No pressure, just when you're ready. Marcus looked at the message for a long time. His finger hovered over the keyboard. He thought about everything that had happened. The sacrifice, the silence, the accusation, the truth, the separation, the letter. He thought about whether some things could be fixed, or if they just had to be survived. He thought about Robert, who'd treated him like a son, who'd trusted him with things that mattered, who'd never known the weight Marcus carried, but maybe would have understood why he carried it quietly. Marcus set the phone down without replying, not because he didn't care, not because he was angry, but because some decisions need more than a moment. Some answers need time to become true. He returned to his work, fingers on the keyboard, window open to let in the November air. The city was quiet. The apartment was quiet. And in that quiet, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not peace exactly, but the possibility of it. The knowledge that he'd done what he needed to do. That honor isn't loud. That love sometimes looks like silence. That carrying weight for someone else is its own reward, even when they never know the weight existed. Some people carry weight in silence, not because they want praise, but because noise would make it heavier. Marcus Thompson was one of those people. And whether Vanessa understood that now, whether they found their way back to each other or learned to live apart, that didn't change the truth of what he'd done. It didn't make the sacrifice less real. It didn't make him less whole. He'd promised Robert something without words. He'd kept that promise. Everything else was just what came after. So let me ask you this. If you sacrificed everything for someone, and they blamed you for the one thing you couldn't control, would you tell them the truth immediately, or would you let them discover it on their own? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if this story made you think, share it with someone who needs to hear it. I'll see you in the next one.